On today's show, a little bit of extra podcasting in response to the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, and a little bit of a Hawks link involving Julius Randle and Clint Capela. We'll get into that, plus some training camp roster notes and more, and all that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1808 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Saturday, on a Saturday afternoon, in fact, in late September. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Begin the NFL season with a big return at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. It's been busy on the show in recent days. I did 5 episodes this week. It's actually episode number 6, technically, of last week, or number 1 of next week. How do you want to view that? But that also includes a show that I did on Thursday with Robbie Callan. That was kind of immediately out of date, at least within 24 hours after the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, as well as a show that I dropped on Friday night that I want to promote again heavily right now. That was a still relevant podcast with myself and Greg Wissinger, talking all about the Kings pick and projecting Sacramento and all the nuts and bolts of that transaction and what the Hawks might be getting out of the first round pick that could come from Sacramento as soon as 2025. So listen to that one, please. With that said, I am going a little bit off the schedule on this Saturday afternoon. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I'm using a virtual background, Glenn Willis style. So hopefully you will know that's not like my actual background, but trying to give you some extra content going into Media Day on Monday. And I got a lot of questions on Friday night and Saturday morning about the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, which of course dropped on Friday. It's kind of honestly a big time stunner across the league. I don't think anyone was ready for that transaction, with Towns going to New York in exchange for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and a bunch of other stuff, including a first-round pick, and still not been announced, but that's obviously going to be happening at this point in time. And it happened like less than an hour after I posted the show with Greg Wissinger about the Kings pick and the latest Hawks news. So if that had happened last night, I would have added a few minutes at the top of the show about that, because it was there was some Hawks stuff in, tangentially anyway, related to it. The deal does not directly involve the Hawks at all. But again, I got a lot of questions about some reporting around Julius Randle and Clint Capela. So a little bit of extra content for you heading into Monday's Media Day for the Hawks. So there's some reporting from Ian Begley, formerly of ESPN, now of SNY, I believe, that was, I think, misinterpreted by some Hawks fans that saw what they wanted to see, or maybe they were also just like maybe mad or confused about the reporting. But here's what Begley actually reported. Quote, Detroit, Atlanta, and Miami are among the other teams the Knicks talked to about trades of Julius Randle, per SNY sources, end quote. Crucially, that does not report that the Hawks were actively pursuing Julius Randle, or that they had interest in Julius Randle, or that they were trying to trade for Julius Randle. They talked to the Knicks, according to the reporting from Ian, which I trust, but it was not like the Hawks were banging down the door for Julius Randle. Keep that in mind. In fact, I've heard basically that the Hawks do not want Julius Randle. They have talked to the Knicks. I have heard, dating back to the summer, about Capela for obvious reasons that I'll talk about more in a second. But it was not a situation in which the Hawks were actively trying to get Julius Randle, nor did Ian report that they actually were. So that's just the most important thing here. People treated it, at least some people that I saw, like the Hawks were like super interested in Randle or trying to go get him. That's not what was reported, nor does that sort of align with what I've heard about what actually is going on here. For what it's worth, by the way, Ian Begley was not alone in reporting Knicks' interest in Clint Capela. I reported some on this. Jake Fisher did on Friday night, formerly of Yahoo. I don't know where Jake's going next, but he reported that some on Friday. I talked about Capela and the Knicks back on episode 1771, so 37 episodes ago, back in late July. It was already a topic at that point that the Hawks could be interested. Well, maybe the Knicks could be interested in Capela to fill their center hole before the latest update on Mitchell Robinson, who's their starting center right now, at least until the Towns trade, that will put them out of action. He'll be out of action for several weeks now. So they had a pretty dire need at center. And obviously they're all in after the Mikal Bridges addition. OG Anunoby is there, all that stuff. And to reach those heights, Robinson's been banged up a lot in his career. He's a totally fine player, but isn't going to be like a huge minute guy. They lost Isaiah Hartenstein, et cetera, et cetera. So Capela made a lot of sense to them. So on the more practical side, the same challenges still existed with Capela and the Knicks that were present the entire time. And the biggest one by far was just the machinations and like the matching salary that they would need to do a trade between the Hawks and the Knicks involving Capela. Frankly, the Knicks just didn't have the logical financial framework for Capela trade unless Randle was in it. And that's kind of where you get back to the reporting that Ian did, because it's the only kind of logical way. I won't say it's the only way, but is the clearest way by far to make a deal happen would have been involving Randle. And quite obviously, New York has a much higher valuation of Julius Randle than they do of Clint Capela. So basically what that means, is we'll get into it again in a second, is that it wasn't as if the Knicks were calling to offer Randle for Capela straight up. That's not what was happening here. It would have been Capela and a lot more stuff for the Knicks to actually say yes. So the Knicks had 7 guys making $10 million or more. A few of those were just not going to be traded. Brunson, Anunoby, Bridges. I think the Knicks would obviously rather have DiVincenzo, who they just traded, or Josh Hart than Capela in a vacuum. Then you have Randle and Mitchell Robinson. And again, Robinson is hurt. Obviously they could have done a Capela Robinson deal, but number one, that wouldn't fix the Knicks problem, because it just will give, I should say Capela is more available. I would say safer, and frankly, I think he's a little bit better. But even if you don't, he's more projectable because Robinson's hurt right now. But even then, do the Hawks even want Robinson's salary on the books for next year when Capela is going to be expiring? I don't know. And I don't think the Hawks ever really talked about a swap of Capela and Robinson. Maybe they did, and I never heard about it, but it wasn't really about that. It was about the Knicks adding to their center room, not swapping centers, I would say. Now, on the Randle thing, there could be a deal there in theory. I won't say it's impossible, but once again, drive this point home. The Knicks value Randle quite a bit more than Capela. They didn't just trade Randle to trade Randle. They traded Randle in a deal for Karl-Anthony Towns, who I know is polarizing, but is a star-level player making huge money. They were not going to give Randle away. And while I think Capela is pretty good, Randle has a higher valuation, pretty obviously. And I would say crucial point number 2 here is that Randle doesn't really fit in Atlanta. So if you're the Knicks and you call the Hawks, which I think happened, about a deal involving Randle and Capela, you're going to want other positive value assets coming with Capela in the deal, or else you don't do it. Again, the Knicks were not offering Randle for Capela. That's a different conversation altogether. But that basically means that you would want picks or cheap young players or whatever else. It would be Capela and positive stuff. And by the way, not DeAndre Hunter. It would be like Capela and Buffkin, or Capela and Okongwu, or Capela and Dyson Daniels, whatever you want to say. It wouldn't be Reese Shea, obviously, or Jalen or Trey, but like Capela and something else that's positive to even make the deal even possible on the Knicks side. And while I know that some Hawks fans don't always view Jalen Johnson as a power forward, he currently is the power forward for the Hawks. And I've argued this before. I think he might be number 1 on their call sheet right now as far as like untouchable guys. They're not going to trade. They're not going to trade Jalen. They're building around Jalen, etc. So bringing in Julius Randle, who is pretty much a pure power forward, doesn't make a lot of sense. Plus, he's going to be on an expiring contract. He has a player option for next year, but he's expected to decline that and sign a new deal. And if you're the Hawks, even if they just for some reason love Julius Randle, which I've not heard that they do, they wouldn't want to trade for him on an expiring contract on a team he doesn't really fit on, because he and Jalen don't make sense together, and he's not a center. So it's like, what are we even doing here? I could go longer on that. I won't, but it just didn't make sense from a fit perspective either, beyond just the logistics. And then just to say this out loud, beyond a Robinson for Capela swap or a Randle for Capela and more swap, that was kind of the only way the Knicks could make it happen. Again, the Knicks were not going to send DiVincenzo or Hart to Atlanta for Capela. That wasn't going to happen. You could say that like Precious Achiuwa and Miles McBride get you to like $12 million in salary, but that's not enough to get to Clint. That would have been enough for Larry Nance, but that's not what happened. So long story short, NBA trades are hard, and particularly with Capela's salary, a deal, and I would say particularly a 2-team deal with the Hawks and the Knicks would have surprised me always because of the logistics. But again, just one more time, it would not have been Capela for Randle. It would have been Capela and a lot of other stuff for Randle, which I understand Randle is better than Capela. I agree with that. But for what the Hawks actually need, Randle doesn't really check that box. Contractually, he doesn't check that box. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So there you go. Big picture, what I would say to clarify the first segment of this podcast is it was not a situation where the Hawks were trying to trade for Julius Randle. It was the Knicks actually trying to trade for Clint Capela to help fix their center spot, but there not being a really logistically matchmaking situation there that did not involve Randle. And if the Hawks had loved Randle, maybe they would find a deal for him. But in the end, I've said this online, I said this on the podcast back in July, I didn't really see a two-team deal happening just because logistics made it too difficult for it to come together. All right, more to come on this episode, including a mailbag question and a look at the training camp roster that the Hawks announced on Saturday in advance of Monday's media day. But first, a word from our partners on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Football is here in a big way. If you're an NFL fan, you can also start the season with a big return at FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and we happen to have a hunch in the middle of the game. Check out a lot of different information sets from the latest stats to live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you can place your bets at FanDuel Sportsbook. You'll also get started with a great offer from FanDuel as well. That is $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You should also know the FanDuel Sportsbook app is really so easy to use. They have all the stuff you're looking for across the sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads, money lines, player props, live betting, same-game parlays, future bets, and so much more. The app is safe, it's secure at FanDuel, and they also cover the entire range of sports as well. NFL, college football, NBA, WNBA, MLB, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And now is a great time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And again, one more time, FanDuel.com is the place to get started. Get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And one more time, one more plug here. Visit FanDuel.com and check out America's #1 sportsbook. All right, one more thing on the Towns, Randle, Capela angle here. And a question from Alex, who says, why couldn't the Hawks trade a similar package for Cat? Is it just that the Knicks will pay him or that Atlanta wouldn't want him? It feels like it's never the Hawks in these big trades. So this could be a long answer that I will try to keep short and keep it to the present day for the most part. But simply put, the Hawks didn't really have a package that I would say was like realistic that they would consider actually giving up for Towns that would have been as attractive as what the Wolves got from the Knicks. Now, just to say this out loud, it's not a podcast about the Wolves or the Knicks. The Knicks, I would have done this trade. The Wolves, I wouldn't have. And I think for the Wolves, it's pretty obviously the current deal they actually made for Towns is pretty obviously financially motivated. Saves them a lot of money in the future. Anyway, back to the Hawks. Obviously, I use the word realistic because the Hawks are not going to trade Trae Young or Jalen Johnson or Zachary Shai in a deal for Karl-Anthony Towns. Because Towns, while a good player, makes a lot of money for a long time, etc. More than $50 million a year. I'm not exaggerating, more than $50 million a year for the next 4 years for Towns. Number one, you have to match that salary and also pay him that much moving forward. And to even get to that salary, you got to include like multiple of the Capela, Hunter, Bogey, Okongwu guys who make real money. Again, not including Trae or Jalen. Like, you have to trade two of those guys. And without going crazy into this, as I always do, Capela's an expiring contract, could be like kind of neutral, but not a huge positive, of course, on that contract. Hunter is underwater. Okongwu, yeah, it's a favorable deal, but like, would the Wolves want Okongwu on a? That's the whole point. Like, they already have Gobert and Nasri, and they're not going to have Okongwu as like a centerpiece of this trade for Towns. And then Bogey, who I love, like, yeah, he'd help the Wolves, but like that isn't going to be a centerpiece probably in your Towns deal. So I'm not the biggest Randle guy in the world. He's clearly being viewed as a positive by the Wolves in this transaction. And Dante DiVincenzo had a great year and is actually got a really good contract. It's very cheap, like 4 years and $48 million. Like, it's a very cheap contract for a good player. So, like, without going super deep into this, it wasn't a fit right now for the Hawks roster-wise or money-wise for Towns because of these self-inflicted, which I will always say, these self-inflicted limitations the Hawks have on what they're going to be willing to pay for their salary. Towns was always a popular internet trade piece when they had DeJounte. Maybe if you still had DeJounte on the team, it would have made some sense to have a DeJounte Towns swap with some other stuff around it. But Murray is no longer on the team. So, like, as far as like making a big trade, and that's part of the question here, the Hawks did make a pretty big all-in trade just only 2 years ago. I know it sounds like a long time ago. It feels like a long time ago now for the Murray trade. Number one, it didn't work. But they did do a deal like this where they put their chips in the middle. It was a flawed transaction that didn't work, but they have done some active things. And right now, they give themselves the money restrictions. Of course, it's something which teams don't have. Like the Knicks are going to be paying a lot of money for this team, and the Hawks wouldn't do that. Plus, they're also currently hard capped. Anyway, they're kind of also in a reset mode right now. The Hawks are not really in their like push chips to the middle they're kind of learning this season. And while I've said before, and I'll say again right now, I think the Hawks will win more games this year than last year. They're also doing it while looking toward the future, pivoting a little bit the roster, learning about guys like Okongwu and Dyson Daniels and Reece Shea, who they just invested in, and Jalen. Like, it's not like they're all in on this current roster. So that's long story short. Would Towns be really good on the team? Maybe he would be. I think Towns and Trey offensively would be really awesome, and that's been a topic for a long time. But like, there's lots of reasons why this wouldn't have happened, why this didn't happen. But the number one, honestly, right now would be that the Hawks just couldn't realistically beat what the Wolves got for Towns unless they wanted to include Trey or Jalen, and they weren't going to do that. So, or Reece Shea. And so at the end of the day, like, you have to have a package that works, and this one didn't really work for Atlanta. Okay, before we get out of here, some training camp roster notes, actually, from Saturday morning. The Hawks announced their roster for training camp. This is not their official season roster. Camp rosters are less official, but there were very little in the way of surprises. Some notes, though. It's the first time the NBA officially listed Zachary Shea with height and weight. He is listed at 6'9" and 215 pounds. So 6'9", 215 for Reece Shea. As a reminder, going back to the Combine, and by the way, he came to the International Combine before the draft, not the one in America. He measured 6'8.5" without shoes and 194.6 pounds at the Combine in about 3.5 months ago. I'm kind of skeptical that he's gained 20 pounds. Maybe he has. It's possible he's gained 20 pounds in 3 months. But NBA listings are a little bit shaky sometimes. I'm also confident that he has gotten bigger because, number one, he's probably eating American food, but also, more importantly than that, he's lifting, and the Hawks have been making a point since the day of the draft to say he's got to get bigger and stronger. So I would guess he's between where he weighed in June and 215, but maybe that's real. We'll see. I do buy the height, though. 6'8.5" without shoes is basically like 6'10" in shoes. Trey, by the way, did an interview, I think it was with Clutch Points this week, in which he said on the record that he thinks Reece Shea is taller than his listed height. So whatever that means, Reece Shea is legitimately 6'9", if not 6'10", and there you go on that. Another one to note here is Dyson Daniels listing. He's 6'7" and 203 pounds, but that is exactly the same as what the Pelicans listed him at before last season. So I would be skeptical they did a remeasure on Dyson. I bet he probably doesn't weigh the exact same amount that he did a year ago. That's just my guess. Anyway, official numbers, like jersey numbers for some guys. Some of these we kind of knew, but just as a reminder for all the new players. Dyson will wear number 5. Larry Nance, number 22. That's his usual number. David Rye is going to be wearing number 8. Don Barlow, single 0. Keaton Wallace, number 2. And Cody Zeller, number 41. Also of note, Kevon Harris and Daquan Plowden are the 2 non-guaranteed camp invites that are actually going to camp at UGA with the Hawks. I touched on this briefly on Friday with Greg. The Hawks have done already some roster machinations here. They've already signed and cut 3 guys to get them to the G League. So they've actually signed 5 guys and cut 3 of them. The 2 that are left over are Harris and Plowden, who are, by the way, the best prospects of those 5 guys. Makes sense. I think it's still not likely that they're going to make the team because the Hawks don't have a roster spot. It's full right now, but they're both I think at least two-way level players. Like, they're real professional players. So having them in camp for depth is a good idea. And 2 more things here. Nikola Jurisic is not on the camp roster, which prompted some questions on social media when I posted the camp roster. I will repeat what I said a little bit this summer already, but the simple answer there is that he can't be on the roster because he's not under contract. I know that's kind of weird, and for a guy who just got drafted, I understand it's all odd, but the combination of him being currently hurt, I know he's in Atlanta, he's been in pictures with guys that are on the team. The Hawks are monitoring his rehab and recovery from the injury when he broke his foot at Summer League, but he is not on an NBA contract, so that he can't be on the roster without being under contract. I know it's weird, but the Hawks still have his rights. Don't worry about that. He's hurt right now anyway, but maybe it'll sort itself out in the next few weeks. But for now, he's not Ben Stash. He's in Atlanta, so that's notable to me. But as a reminder, if you missed it, when he got hurt back in July, they said his reevaluation date for his broken foot will be November. So he's going to be out for a little while longer, no matter what. And right now they have a full roster, both 2-ways and full roster as far as the guarantee contracts are concerned. So he's got nowhere to go, and he can't be on the roster because he's not under contract. Last thing, the Hawks announced 12 assistant coaches, plus a specific player development coach. So they are not skimping on that aspect of the organization. They are very, very full on Quinn's staff. That's not a shock. They like to invest in that. I know Quinn's been big on that. I'm sure they promised Quinn some investment on that when he signed to come over to Atlanta. Steve Cly, who is the new College Park head coach, is still listed as an assistant under Quinn. That's of note, but he'll be back and forth, of course. And also, they finally announced their basketball operations changes a few days ago, headlined by Ben Peterson, who's the new head of player health and performance. He missed this earlier this summer. Peterson actually is coming over from the 49ers in the NFL. So that'd be interesting to see what that kind of looks like. He's the head of the training operation. So the next time that a Hawks player gets hurt and I have to hear about the training staff being the problem, he's the new guy. Give him some time, I should say. I don't know about his philosophy just yet, but just remember the biggest thing on the outside is that we never know all this stuff anyway, but the Hawks have a new training staff. So like it will take a while to figure out what they're going to prioritize, how they're going to operate, et cetera. And he is the head of that after being with the Niners previously. Okay. That's all I have on this special / extra / bonus episode on a Saturday going into Sunday. One more time. I did a show on Friday with Greg Wissinger that still very much should be listened to right now, talking about the Kings pick and some new stuff. Before that, I did mailbag stuff. This week, I did a 2-part deep dive on Trae Young with Glenn Willis on the podcast. I did my first over-under podcast with Robbie Cowland on Thursday. We are wall-to-wall in this space. Also, Anthony Early came on the show about a week and a half ago, talking about the Lakers. Tower Jones is always coming on the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. A great time to find the podcast, subscribe to the show. And Media Day is Monday. So as of Monday morning, I will be in the building for that, and I'll have full coverage throughout the day of that. And certainly a post-game podcast at some point. Post-game, in this instance, the game is actually Media Day, but a post-Media Day podcast on Monday evening at some point. So stay tuned for that. I promise you I'll have some content from Media Day. Please subscribe. Tell your friends. Check us out on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. Please like this video right now as you're watching it on YouTube if you are watching it, and please subscribe to the show on that platform. Follow the show on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks. Follow us as well across the board, and really send on questions if you want to. LockedOnHawks@gmail.com is the place to go ahead and do that. Also follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you all next time.